of use. We are delighted to be joined by some special guests this evening as well. So we'll have a quick run through of who's on the call. So there's a sort of a panel of 4 of us that will be leading the discussion this evening, but we'll also open it up to everybody else that's on. And we just ask that if you have anything, please just drop it in the chat to begin with. And if it's something perhaps where we want you to extend that a little bit, and if you're happy to, we may invite you to just unmute or put your camera on so you can share that. So I'll hand over to Danny Ireland to begin with.
Andy, thanks for that. And evening, everyone. Quick introduction. You can read there. I'm from Whitford Town. I'm actually the football development officer, and inclusion officer is now added to my title, and that'll become apparent as we go through the conversations today. Bit of background about myself: played to quite a good standard, coached for years. I'd had to relearn how to coach in grassroots football over the last sort of 9-10 years, because playing at high standard does not prepare you to look after the kids I'm looking after now. I currently coach at under-8s, under-17s, and I run an inclusion session on a Thursday for the club, which again I'll go into more detail over the call. Bit of background about myself: Exceptional Individuals is my company. I'm the chief exec of a specialist employment agency. We help and support neurodivergent adults into employment and to stay in employment, working with companies on reasonable adjustments. I'm fortunate enough also to be the chair of a charity close to my heart, Myotis. It was previously known as Takawatanga, which was a Maori word for autism. We changed our title about 12 months ago to Myotis, which actually stands for My Own Time and Space. And we actually work with families who've neurodivergent children, helping them to stay and maintain mainstream schooling if possible, if not, offering help and support and alternatives to that. Thanks, Andy. Paula, do you want to pick up?
Thanks, Danny. So I'm from Myotas as well. Just a little bit more about what we do at Myotas. Very much about supporting the child, the young person, and that the best way for us to do that and to really improve the outcomes for our young people is by we provide some activities for the children themselves. But it's the complete package, and the support and the help for the families. We run online support groups, face-to-face support groups, wellbeing walks, and training for our families. But a third strand of support, and very much that's why we're very happy to have been invited along today, is increasing the awareness and acceptance for neurodivergent young people in the community. So for a lot of our young people, they do attend mainstream school, groups for physical disabilities, learning disabilities aren't really appropriate for a lot of our young people, but actually mainstream activities are very difficult for them to access. So it's kind of completely understanding that people here are volunteers, but seeing what we can do to offer help, insight, information, and any support from our charity to help open access to our young people in these groups as well, in the mainstream groups. I'd also, if I may, like to talk in a few moments about my experiences as a parent of autistic and football mad 15-year-old, because he's had an interesting journey and football's been a big part of his life. Thank you. Over to Millie.
Evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's really great to see so many people on tonight's call. My role is the Equality and Inclusion Officer for Essex FA, so I work massively to support the disability football pathway and all elements of equality, diversity and inclusion, really trying to bring to life the idea that the football is for all. Alongside sort of my work job, I coach an under-9s team, and I all not very well anymore, sadly, but lots of different hats in the same way that I think most of you all do.
Brilliant, thanks everyone. And my name is Andy Crowell. My role at Essex FA is Coaching Development Officer, looking after kind of coach development, coach support county-wide for everyone who's kind of, you know, pre-qualifications, just getting involved, just starting out their volunteering journey, all the way through to those that have kind of gone through some of their qualifications and things. We spend quite a lot of time with clubs, supporting groups of clubs within coaches, within clubs. I'm also involved delivering some of the courses for the FA, so on the Introduction to Coaching Football course, and also the UEFA C licence. So I've been fortunate to be involved in sort of a coach developer role with them for about 7 years or so now, and I've also had other roles as a coach mentor. So very, very fortunate to have worked with an awful lot of people out on the grass, always picking up new ideas, learning new things, trying things. In terms of volunteering, currently looking after a Wildcats session at a local club in sort of Great Notley area near Braintree, and also as football parent. So my son, who plays under 10s, I've managed to avoid coaching that team somehow. I don't know how that's happened for a few years, but I actually get to just go and enjoy as much as I can to go and watch him play. So that's, yeah, different hats, like a lot of you, but yeah, I've had lots of experiences working with lots of different ages, abilities. I'm very, very fortunate to have worked with in a lot of schools with children with SEN, and also some special schools as well, which has given me some really interesting insight. But I still consider myself very much at the start of the journey in this. So I think the curiosity and discussions that Millie and I have had in the past, and lots of things that we get in at Essex FA, we really wanted to start some of these conversations and start to delve into other avenues. So there is an awful lot of support out there, which we'll touch on this evening. But please do, you know, take notes, ask questions, challenge things if you think it's appropriate. But we'll send out some additional resources beyond this as well. So just to kick things off, give you a few moments just to find the chat function and perhaps type a few ideas in there, and in a few moments I'll hand over to Danny and Paula just to go into a little bit more kind of background, a bit more context with regards to kind of neurodivergence. But is there anything specific that you're hoping to get from this evening, or is there anything specific you'd like some support with as a coach? Please feel free to pop in the chat. And not just now, but also throughout the evening as well. It'd be really good to know. Before we go any further, perhaps whilst people are typing, Millie, I think was it last summer we kicked off with a kind of a disability roadshow, which we delivered. I'm not sure if anyone was on the call was there, but it was over at Writtle Sports Ground in Chelmsford, and we had quite a range of coaches that are working in different environments, just looking at ways we can perhaps adapt some practices and give some sort of practical ideas. So at the end of the call today, we will signpost you to another one of those events that we have coming up at the end of May over at Wickford Town Football Club, and we just feel like that would be quite a nice follow-on from this, to kind of continue the conversation and perhaps bring it to life a little bit more, and maybe even just have those kind of offshot, you know, individual conversations around things that might be kind of bugging you at the moment or being a real challenge. We want as many people, you know, particularly children, young people, to fall in love and stay in love with the game for as long as possible, and, you know, whether that be playing opportunities, or they go on to coach or to referee, but also, you know, for the people that are on this evening, is to keep you in the game as well, because it's so important. And sometimes it really teeters around, am I going to stay, am I going to go, because of a particular challenge or situation that may come up. So we're really, really keen to support as much as possible. So if there are other conversations you want to have, then please let us know. Danny and Paula, if I can hand over to you for the next section. If anybody thinks of anything else that they'd like, please just stick it in the chat for us, please.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'll give a high-level overview, and Paula's far more sort of experience around the specifics of this. But if I just give you an overview of maybe some of the myth busters and such like, and also manage what you're probably not going to hear on this call is, you know, if you look at this sort of these different types of neurodivergence, that's why they call it a spectrum. You could meet one autistic child and they've got to be looked at as an individual. You're not, the thing you won't get tonight is, if you're dealing with an autistic child, here's what you can do. What you've got to have is a more diverse and inclusive thinking approach, so that you open up opportunities for these children that are neurodivergent to be able to cope in the environment that you've built. So if you look at these different ones, they're all on a spectrum, and that spectrum can be totally at either poles of that spectrum. So if you look at an autistic child, they may be very verbal, very articulate, very intelligent, and you may not pick up that.
Danny, you've just muted. Sorry.
Did I mute it? I didn't touch anything, honestly. Somebody muted me. I've probably started going off on a tangent. I did say your hardest challenge will be keeping me to the time. Sorry, how far did we get? How much did you
may
hear?
have to just rewind maybe a minute or so.
Yeah,
Said about the spectrum.
That spectrum, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody on that spectrum is an individual. You've got to realise that. So the autism, and a lot of people recognise autism. One child may be really vocal, really communicative, very, very intelligent, very detail orientated. Another autistic child could be the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're non-verbal, really insular to themselves, quite introvert and not communicative. So I just wanted to open your thought process that this is not going to be a tick box exercise where if I've got an autistic child, this is what I need to do. It's more about your thought process and opening up that diverse, inclusive thought process to include what differences they bring. And it's just that the brain commutes things differently and reacts differently, just more acutely than a neurotypical child would do. So Paul, I don't know whether you want to pick up there on some specifics, but that's the start of the process of thinking, how can you include these children? Paul?
Yeah, I'm on mute as well. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely it, Danny. So we try and make it as simple as possible. You know, all those terms that are there we've heard, but it's thinking about things as processing information in a different way. And you know, all of those types of neurodivergence that are on the screen there are exactly that. And we try not to put too many labels on things, and actually having a diagnosis or not having a diagnosis isn't completely central to this. And in fact, as coaches, particularly for those of you saying that you're coaching under 8s and under 9s, you might have a lot of undiagnosed young people, and in fact perhaps you are seeing some of their issues for the first time. Perhaps the parents may or may not be aware of the difficulties, so you know, it might be you that are picking up on some of these things. And it's about, you know, maybe not getting too hung up with that diagnosis, but just encapsulating any kind of sort of difficulty, social anxiety, you know, it could be mental health difficulties, particularly as children get older. If their needs aren't being met, whatever those needs are, then they can start to get anxious about their ability to fit in, and you know, be very acutely aware of their differences, and that can start to impact on their self-esteem, and all these things can come out in a social environment as well. So I kind of humour me a little bit, because I bring this story out a few times, but I think it really does help to demonstrate how really important and beneficial to young people football, you know, social groups, but football in particular can be. So typically for our young people, as Danny said, Sockability caters for the children that have got physical disabilities and learning disabilities, but there's an awful lot of children out there who are expected to cope in a mainstream school, and because their friends are all from a mainstream school, they're trying to attend mainstream after school activities as well. Now, sometimes at school they'll have a one-to-one helper or other things to help. They may not, so they might be struggling to cope all day at school as well. Perhaps they're on the edge of being able to go to school. Perhaps you've got children that don't go to school. So for us, My son had difficulties. He's 15 now, but from halfway through primary school, really started to find school very difficult. Too many children in the classroom, too much noise. He's a very intelligent boy, but constantly feeling in overwhelm and not really understanding what he was able to do. From a very young age, though, he has always loved football, and the team of the peers around him at football, when he was having difficulties with social relationships at school, that team that was around him at football was always very important. And I've always said to him as well, you know, in England, if you can go into a pub as an adult and talk about football or make small talk about football, it's a good start to anything, isn't it? And he loves his football. So he was in and out of school all through primary school, but kept his football going, and the football club were very supportive. At times, you know, his behaviour could be very volatile, and I, as a parent, could see how much his football meant to him. It was a very positive influence on his life at a time when he was having difficulty accessing anything, difficulty accessing school, difficult accessing friendships, and football was the thing he lived for every week. It was the one high spot in his week. And then COVID came, and he really descended into a very difficult space. His football had been taken, any routine was taken, all the things that were important for him, and he had a very difficult time. And just to give you an overview of what that kind of looked like, not leaving his bedroom, not cleaning his teeth, not being able to engage in any kind of day-to-day life apart from twice a week, as we were coming out of lockdown, football training and a football match at the weekend. And so just trying to give you an insight into, as a parent, the parent mentality of a child who is disengaged with life, but actually football is that one thing that is keeping him in touch with his friends, in touch with something that is in society. And over time, you know, he kept that going. That was the building block for us, from which he built back up to going back into school. So personally, as a family, it has been an incredibly positive experience. I think the thing for me as a parent that it's worth saying is, you know, I've seen him struggle at football, I've seen him struggle at other groups, I've seen him struggle at school. As a parent, I'm so desperate for him to work, and I feel very lucky to have found Danny and to have found Wickford Town Football Club, who kind of took that onus and that responsibility and took some of that pressure off. But I can completely understand how parents could be overbearing or, you know, very anxious, and transfer that anxiety onto their children, coming into an environment where they're not sure they're going to cope. They're not coping in day-to-day life outside of football. Will they cope in football? So the parents are anxious as well. And also, you know, as a parent, very aware that coaches are volunteers, and you know, how much can you really expect a coach to make allowances for your children and so on. But hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about here are some reasonable adjustments that can just make things, you know, the quick and easy things that can just make things so much easier for your child. So I'm hoping that Danny and the guys will be able to share some of those things. I think it's great to be able to share my personal story, but what I would say is, at my OTAS, what makes me realise how important this is, it is not just me, it is many dozens of parents that are saying the same things. Their children are only just hanging on to education, whether or not they've got a diagnosis, whether it's autism, any of those other types of neurodiversity that you can see there. They're finding life very difficult, and they are very grateful to the people that can help them bring some quality of life and give them some enjoyment back in life. So as a charity, we're very aware that we can't do this for all our young people. They don't want to come to special needs groups and to our charity events. They want to do with the things with their friends. So as I said at the outset, anything that we can do to provide information or help, we're very keen to do, because we realise how beneficial this can be for our young people.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Paula. Thank you for sharing the story. Really appreciate that. And I think that will have struck a chord with quite a few people, and I was nodding away with thinking about some of my own experiences with our eldest child and some things that we're going through with him and his school, just to, you know, some adjustments, as you say, just to kind of make things a little bit easier, and to not to put a label on things necessarily, but just to understand better what he needs in particular environments and at particular times. And I think that's really important. I think I suppose what we would hope from these kind of conversations is it just sparks a little bit of thought around, well, sometimes you can feel quite isolated as a grassroots coach, and many of you might be kind of struggling on your own, and you haven't necessarily got somebody else that you work with. That happens quite often. But I think what we'd like to try to do is have some of these conversations, or encourage you to have these conversations within your club. You know, so it may be that it just takes one person, i.e. somebody on this call this evening, to go and just start that conversation. Go, do you know what, we've got a managers meeting coming up, but what about this? Because this will exist, and if you're a big club, this will exist multiple times over. Some you'll be aware of, some not so much. And I think it's just, none of us are going to be experts in this. You're fortunate if you do find people that are, but you know, there may be, for example, some teachers that have some experience of this and have had some training, and they can sort of contribute to discussion, or parents that have had, you know, been through, you know, Paula shared some examples there herself, and just to start some of these conversations, go, how can we best support these young people that are coming into our club, or that already exist in our club, to make sure that they have a positive experience. And I'm sure Danny will be able to share some of his examples, but once that starts, it can really snowball in a positive way, and they go, oh, there's this activity that we can go along to. It might just be a recreational session, or it might be a more organised team kind of situation, and go, right, we want to be part of this. And there's some Minnie's working with lots of clubs across the county who've already established some teams, whether that be kind of impairment specific teams, or it could be kind of more sort of pan disability, and there's other clubs. So for example, Autistic FC is one that I'm aware of, that kind of just started with one of the children wanted to do something, it was given a platform, and now it's kind of exploded into this big thing in the local community. So there's lots out there, and there's lots of support in terms of getting things set up. So please do ask. Just going to move it on to the next little section. So some of you that have been kind of in and around the coaching space, or perhaps on the sort of coach education journey, perhaps you might have done like the old level 1 or level 2, or perhaps more recently on the new pathway. The 4-corner model, something that's existed for a long time. It's not an FA thing, but I believe it might have even started in Canada decades and decades ago. So it's the long-term player development model is what it is, but what we generally refer to as a 4-corner model. Now, what this is a way of, it can be something to support your planning as a coach, or it could even be something to support the kind of the way that you observe the people in front of you when they're playing in training and matches. And it may even be something just to consider when you're trying to encourage somebody to kind of maybe come out of their shell a little bit, or to build a bit of confidence. So what we're looking at here, you can see the 4 corners there. So you've got the kind of technical, tactical stuff, the psychological side of things, social and physical. Now, some of the stuff on the left-hand side with regards to technical and physical, generally they are quite visible, and they're things that you can see that you know, if a player, for example, is able or not able to do, or is particularly good at, or finds challenging. And that's, you know, that's a starting point which a lot of us will go with. I remember for me personally, in the sort of early part of my coaching journey, that's probably where I spent a lot of my time. But it's only really when I got to understand things and matured as a person, as a coach, that actually I realised that coaching is a lot more about impacting individuals, and building relationships and building rapport and understanding what their needs are. Now, what that can feel like as that becomes more apparent to you as a coach is that you're just trying to juggle more plates. So now I've got all these individuals with all these different needs. Where do I start? There are some kind of easy wins. Interestingly, we were speaking about this a little bit before we come on. You know, for example, when you've got some activities going, it might just be a case of when they come to a training session, you know, you've got a group of children there, perhaps under 9s, under 10s. It's just getting them into an activity where they're on task, they're busy, and they're enjoying it. And that ideally would be something that they would choose. So if you think about, for example, the playground is something I use as an example quite often. There might be a game of Wembley going on where they've got to have, you know, either individually or in pairs trying to shoot towards a goal. Now that has all the elements of the game of football, but it means that they're on task and they're doing something, and you can kind of just see that from a distance, perhaps while you're setting something else up or speaking to a parent or carer as they come in. But what that means is that you then get to sort of step back and observe how things are going. So if someone's had a good day, or something's kind of not quite right, and you want to have an individual discussion or just to check in with them, that could be a really good opportunity for you to kind of observe what's going on there. So it's just something that I want to put on there. Paul, I think, mentioned around routine as well. So if you think about your training sessions, yes, you may try different things from time to time, but if we think about some of the individuals that may be in your group that may link to the slide before, and there may be an element of neurodivergence there, it may be something that's undiagnosed, for example, or it could be diagnosed, but it's important that they're playing the game, and that you're able to support it with whatever they need. So it's a challenge, but my advice would be to make sure that they're up and running with an activity as much as possible. One thing that I've put down here is light bulb moments, because I think that's one thing that jumps out for me as a coach and coach developer. Is for me, is when I'm delivering a session, if there's something where somebody goes, look what I did, a child comes up to you, it might even be your own child at home, and says, look what I've done. Look what I've done on my own, I've achieved this. Or it might be something where you see something happen that you've been trying to support an individual with for a while. Those are the real kind of light bulb moments, and I think they're generally the things that keep us as coaches in the game and keep us with a smile on their face. We need to be enjoying it as much as possible, because I think that really does then kind of translate to the people that you're coaching as well. And just one example that I wanted to give on this was, I remember when I was doing a lot of work in schools, I used to have, there may be one or two children in the group who you might kind of label as they're more challenging, or that they're kind of disrupting the session, or session wreckers, I've even heard some individuals called before. Now, the one method that I found can work quite well is actually generally maybe they're not as engaged as they could be. So sometimes what I've done is I've got them to come and be an assistant coach. Now, if you think there may be an individual in your group whereby them coming to be an assistant manager and having that kind of title and responsibility could be really, really interesting and exciting. So that could be something that you could kind of use to your advantage, or even that they might help to referee a game. So things like that, just to kind of think outside the box a little bit. And Danny mentioned about kind of being more diverse in our thinking, is sometimes we can get really frustrated and just go, why can't they do it? Why can't they achieve this thing that I'm asking them to do? It's a simple instruction, but actually there might be something more that they need support with, or perhaps they don't even understand the instruction that we're giving. So sometimes, you know, just coming out of the activity, asking them another question, or just saying, just watch for a moment what so-and-so does. Do you reckon you could try that? Or setting a little challenge can be quite interesting. But I think this really just illustrates that we're working with individuals regardless of who we're coaching, regardless of the group that we have, and we need to just try to take a little bit of a step back sometimes and consider what their individual needs are, interact with others, you know, parents, carers, and find out, you know, some of the things that may work. But I think most importantly, the actual individual themselves. So if an activity's up and running and somebody's finding something particularly challenging, my approach personally would be just to ask them, is there anything you need support with? Is there anything you need some help with? Do you understand what we're doing? And that can be just a kind of a starting point. But that relationship building, I think, is very, very important. Millie, Danny, or Paul, is there anything else that you wanted to add in this section?
Yeah, a couple of things just to put some sort of scale on this, and statistics can say lots of things. The latest statistics are showing that 1 in 7 people are neurodivergent. So that's 15%. So if you look across your club, across your squads, etc., that's just something to consider when deciding what's the difference between poor and bad behaviour and actual differences in how people react to certain circumstances. So that just gives you the scale of the neurodivergent community that's part and parcel of like the society. I like this approach, because I think as a coach this does help you frame what your plans. But if I just dive into a couple of details, and Paul has mentioned his son. Now, he is super intelligent. If I went through a technical and tactical plan at high level, he would challenge me for more detail, as an example. and he would, and I've got instances where he's challenging me in a really good way, and that's where I'm thinking of being more inclusive and diverse. You're the coach, but you can learn from these people. In my business world, we look for spikes of brilliance. We talk about spiky profiles and spiky brilliance. So try to not to be too controlling and actually let the kids take a lead some of the time, because that will get them more engaged, which then psychologically means they're safer. So if you can create a safe psychological environment, i.e. they can challenge you, they can come up with ideas, they can try and take over. Sometimes just let them. I'll give you an example of that on the inclusion session that we run on a Thursday. It's a free format. It's just playing football. It's not coaching. It's not loads of cones, and so it is a game of football. But I give the structure that we always do: rock, paper, scissors to choose the captains, rock, paper, scissors through wears bibs, rock, paper, scissors through sets up. And I had one child come along who's 11, not in mainstream school. And after about a month, he said, "Coach, go and stand over there. I'm running this session." And he did exactly the same thing with rock, paper, scissors, picked them and everything. I spoke to his mum and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, he can't do that structure in school, and he's in a special needs school. He hasn't got that interaction and that psychologically safe environment to be able to step forward like that. And I was actually beaming. Now, I know a lot of coaches will say, no, it's my session, it's that. Just open your mind. And they had such a good time, and I could just sit there and enjoy it because they ran themselves. So that helped him with his social skills, that he was actually talking to people a lot older than him, a lot younger than him, in a way that has been restricted previously. And it's those little wins that you can get. And coming back to Paula's son, I probably coached him for 18 months or so. Psychologically, he was all over the place, and we've got to give him some reasonable adjustments to let off steam, walk away, get his own time and space. Coming back to our charity, after about 18 months at training, he told me to shut up. And that was his one step forward where he could vocalize how he was feeling and how he was thinking. And we just had that rapport from that day where he felt psychologically safe to be able to speak up. Whereas previously in school environments and things like that, imagine saying that to a teacher. So that's what I'm saying about you. Open your mind to the opportunities to let these kids just enjoy themselves, and don't overstructure, but look at a framework and boundaries. You have to have boundaries in place. They've still got to take responsibility for their own safety and the teammates' safety. That's where you put the boundaries in place for each individual. So I like this, the four corners I use a heck of a lot, especially in the neurodivergent space, because it gets you to think about how's that child reacting when I'm saying and doing things.
Dan, it's really interesting because there's something we speak about a lot around kind of ownership and responsibility, particularly for children and young people when you're coaching them. And sometimes it is us as coaches letting go a little bit, as you're saying, kind of, and putting some trust, some responsibility into but if you think about the benefits of that, they far outweigh anything else. If you think about the kind of life skills that are being built there, regardless of the individuals that you're working with, there's so much that can come from that. And it's kind of, to mention, it gets back to that kind of playground environment, dealing with kind of controversy, or dealing with an issue with another person, and they have to work through that, and they have to find where those kind of boundaries are and support each other within that. And I think also, if we try to kind of give everything and be everything as a coach, we actually do make a rod for our own backs. We're actually making our life a lot harder. Now, unfortunately, from what I see for a lot of more novice coaches, that is kind of the go-to, and I certainly was the same, is that I wanted to try and run and control things, and thought, well, if I can't do that as a coach, then I'm not being a good coach. But actually have realized over a period of time that actually handing more of the game back to those people, that it's their game at the end of the day, and if they can own it more, there's so much that can come from that as well. And as long as we're there just to support and guide and pick them up if they fall, and I think that's an important role of the coach, isn't it?
Yeah, agree.
It'd be good to just like bring that back round to, I think you guys have used open-mindedness so much when you've been talking there, and I say this all the time when I talk about anything EDI related, but as volunteers, we don't expect you to know everything, and at no point will you probably know everything. We certainly don't. but it's having that open-mindedness to be creative, let go, and really find out what your players need, that will take that step towards including these players within your environments, and just accepting that you might not know everything and that it's a learning journey for you as well, as the players. So whilst they're going through their football journey of development, you're going through a journey with them as well. And I think once you sort of click with that and you're in a position to open your mind to learning, it becomes much easier for both you and the players to then build that rapport, as Danny said, find creative ways to adapt things, and also just really get down to what works.
And coming back to Andy's point around, I've just taken over this under-8s squad, and it's quite refreshing. I've gone to under-17s and I'm starting the journey back with this other squad. First thing I do is just open the bag of balls and they just kick them around for the first 5 minutes. Because one, at that age, they're full of enthusiasm, they've probably got loads and loads of energy, so just let them burst out. If you try and talk to them and organise something for that first few minutes while they've all got together and everything, you'll lose them, and then they start rebelling and people start saying, oh, they're not listening to me. It's just that they can't receive it. If you take that even further from a neurodivergent child, say they're ADHD and they're full of that enthusiasm and speed for the first 5 minutes, why try and restrict that? Actually let it go. And just let them, as long as, and this is where you put the boundaries in place, as long as they're safe in kicking it around. So if they're kicking into a goal, put the boundaries, only one of you can kick at once, or you've got to shout your name before you kick it. So you put the boundaries in and they self-administer then. You don't need to do that. Let them go, let them do that. And after 5 minutes, you'll find, oh, I need a drink now. Then they're receptive to the next section that you can then put a little bit more structure in. But I see so many coaches getting all these cones out and trying to explain it to the kids, especially from probably under 11 down. They're not receptive to that information for the first few minutes. The neurodivergent child is even more acute around that.
Absolutely. I think, I mean, there are days worth of kind of content and things that we could go through on each individual point. I think some coaches that I've worked with over a longer period of time have kind of, you've seen them go full circle to the point where they're saying, you know, kids, you guys come up with some of the sessions, you build them, you come up with some ideas, we'll give it a go. And but they have that safety to do so, and there's no good idea, bad idea. It's just, we're going to give these things a go, and to see that happening is so refreshing. And some people say, well, that's not coaching, but that comes down to what you feel your role is. You know, if your role is to make them to help them to stay loving the game for as long as possible, then it really does need to kind of come back to that belonging. It needs to belong to them. Just conscious of time, so I'm just going to flick along to the next section. So with regards to adapting activities, this may be something that you've kind of been pondering with regards to individuals within your group, but if I just give you this kind of framework that we tend to use quite often within kind of coaching spaces. The STEP framework, or STEP, sometimes has an additional S, which is in regards to safety. Now, and back to, as it's been mentioned, you know, that safety isn't just the physical things around moving things around and making sure that the surface is safe. It's actually the psychological safety as well. So they can come in and they don't feel like they're going to be berated by you if they don't do something well. So it's actually, you know, it's understanding that, you know, we're in a volunteer environment, it's grassroots football, lots of mistakes will be made, mistakes happen in a professional game, and we just have to kind of come back to that, and we have to go, well, they're going through a learning process. It doesn't matter if it's a game, if it's training, that's all part of the kind of the learning process. Sometimes it may feel like certain situations are kind of more of a risk, perhaps for example match day, because we know that environment can change. But if where possible, we can, again, back to being sort of open-minded, is we can allow those things to happen and make sure that we're there to support. And sometimes one of them is really, really valuable for anybody at any time, you know, regardless of how long they've been in the game. And that could just say, don't worry, try again. Or it could just be, well done, we've been working on that. And that can say an awful lot. And you may notice, actually, particularly with younger children, they do often look over to coaches and parents and carers for approval. So I think us and our body language, again, that's a whole nother topic, but we need to try and be as positive and as kind of uplifting as possible, because we never know, but they're always watching. And they are, you know, a product of their environment. So if we can make sure that that hour or 2 hours a week is nothing but positive, I think that's a good step in the right direction for sure. So with regards to this step framework, this is just, you know, I suppose thinking about some of the things you might do within your training session. So for example, with a space, it may be that particular individuals don't like the real chaos of lots of activity happening all at once. Now, sometimes that might be beneficial for individuals to experience a little bit of that, because that's what the game of football offers. But actually, it may be, do you know what, we're going to have some mini pitches side by side, so 2 or 3 mini pitches with a 2-a-side or a 3 against 2, just kind of side by side with maybe a small gap between it. And I found personally that works quite well, because you can then monitor what's going on and you can speak to individuals or small groups. So if we said, okay, the game is Millie and Danny one end, Paula and I the other end, and we just have to try and score by dribbling it to the other side and stopping the ball on the line. And that's the game. Now, we could have maybe 2 or 3 of those going on at once if we have a bigger group. But what it means is that you can kind of monitor things. And it might be that I just come over to one of the pitch and say, Danny, just come over for a sec. Next time you do that, can you try to do it in this way? Or can you try to pass to Millie on your next go? So we don't have to stop the whole session. We can actually just manage that by having individual discussions and by having multiple pitches set up, just small ones, and ideally with minimal equipment as well, as Danny has already alluded to, because sometimes we set up all kinds of things, which actually makes things a little more difficult at times. With regards to the tasks that you kind of set within your activities, going back to individuals again, regardless of who you're working with, the task that you set or the kind of objective within your session does need to be achievable. So they need to be able to work towards achieving it. Some will achieve it, some maybe not quite, some will surpass it, because you'll have that kind of different spectrum of abilities and understanding. But any kind of tasks that you design or activities you design, it needs to be achievable, and we need to make sure there's some sort of reward within that. So it's scoring a goal, for example, is probably the best reward you can give, or some sort of points. And also that the task kind of links, if you have matches as well, can you try and link it to your matches? So rather than, for example, a line of cones, that may be an introduction for somebody that's trying to learn to dribble the ball, but actually, if they're dribbling between people or between other groups that are operating within the same area, that could be a really good way for them to kind of hone their skills with regards to dribbling the ball. And it may be that somebody's not particularly confident and hasn't maybe done this very much, and you could say to them, right, well, your challenge is, can you dribble past at least one person in this session, or try to dribble past at least one person in this session. And for them to achieve that within that session or within that match, or even it might be in training and then also in the match following it, that could mean so much to that individual. So having those kind of mini wins and achievements along the way is really, really important. Now, again, that's a whole kind of another world of things, but it's something that, particularly in more kind of modern coaching and coach development, is something we try to encourage a lot, is thinking about individuals and how can they work towards achieving kind of a small target. Now, that doesn't have to be something technical. It could just be something as simple as, can you praise one of your teammates? So if I think about some of the younger age groups I work with, maybe 7s, 8s, 9s, 10-year-olds, and sometimes they're not always particularly nice to each other, and there might be lots of different reasons for that. But it could just be, can you tell somebody on your team, can you tell a teammate something that they've done well today, or something they've really tried hard at today? And that could be something that kind of snowballs in terms of the positivity within your group. So there's all these kind of little things that you can try within it, but it's something just to bear in mind. And then with regards to equipment, I mentioned it already, but when you're planning, where possible, try to kind of strip it out a little bit. Try not to have too much going on at once and lots of different things, because that can actually be quite confusing. You know, if you arrive at a session, I think if I think about it from a playing point of view, if I arrive at a session and I see a pitch with 2 goals, that's great, because that's what I've come for. I've come to play the game of football. It might be that we get to that towards the end. It might be that we start with that. It might be that that bit's somewhere in the middle. But if I get to go and score, you know, it might be just polls, for example, but if I get to try and score in a goal in a session, then that's probably one of the reasons that I've come there, because that's the bit that I enjoy about the game. So my advice would be make sure something like that exists within any activities that you're doing, but where possible try to kind of strip it back. Now there are some other really clever ways of interacting with your group with regards to the equipment that you use. So it may be that you use some kind of mini whiteboards or some sort of visuals, because that can be quite a nice thing for people to see. Or it might be that you get people into an activity and they have starting points. So I used to do this quite a lot with some younger groups where we have just flat markers on the ground. And there's a particular individual I remember within a school session I was doing, and that was we called it a launch pad in the end. So every time we did an activity or we were playing a game, they knew they had to go back to their launch pad every time. And that just gave them a little bit of a focus to go, that's where I'm going to start each time we start this activity or our match, or if a goal's been scored. So there's so many things that you can try, and all of you here would have tried lots of creative things, but again, it's just kind of thinking out the box a little bit and going, how can I build up these individuals by giving them some kind of tailored activities, if you like. And obviously the people go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, just on this sort of praising, it's really important, and Paul has just put it in the comments about self-esteem. As a coach, I don't like straight lines, because if you put a straight line of cones, what do kids do? They run in straight lines. So I always use circles, and the equipment is use my under 8s as an example, and there are a couple on the spectrum in there. They each pick a cone up, they all stand in a circle. I tell them to walk backwards, put the cone down, you've got a circle. So they've got part of that responsibility, and I prefer in a circle, all with a ball each, because then they're in their own little zone. As soon as you put cones in a straight line, or you've got them queuing up, or they're doing it individually, everybody else is watching them. So it helps them if you can get them into a group environment, so they're not seen as, I'm standing out because I don't think I'm as good as the others. But then you can walk around that circle, giving little praises and little tips. And then to close the circle, what you do, who can pick the most cones up? So I'm an old, so I don't want to be bending down picking all the cones. So you put a little bit of competition in it, and they fly around, and that's how the neurodivergent individual within your group starts to be feeling part and parcel. Because even if they pick 2 up, you can still praise that. And it's those little things around the equipment and making them feel part and parcel of it, rather than they're almost at school being told what to do and they're having to be so regimented. Just make it fun, and the neurodivergent children will then build a rapport with you and open up with you if they feel as though they're not being put out as being different. Because most of the neurodivergent children know they're different, don't want to be acknowledged that they're different. Paula mentioned Soccerability earlier. I've got my own views of neurodivergent children in Soccerability. I know older groups might be different, but it's just using that equipment to make it part of fun, setting it up and pulling it back down. And it's that consistency where you said about the positivity, it's consistency, because they'll be watching you every minute. And neurodivergent children are very susceptible of picking up detail. So if you even just throw your arms up or roll your eyes, they will pick up on that. And it's so difficult as volunteers, because you've got all this pressure on you to do what you're trying to do your best for. So it's not easy. But yeah, I think the step process helps you just think slightly different. And another one we've talked about before, Andy, is think of your timing as well. I prefer to have my neurodivergent session as close after school finishes with just a sufficient gap for them to calm down, because if they're out of school too long, they'll get diverted onto other things, and then it becomes a challenge for the parents to get them to the session. So there's little things like that you can think about when you're planning your training sessions. So I'm conscious of time. We've done loads of talking. We haven't given
no, it's yeah, passionate about trying to give some useful that's really, really valuable. I think that the bit at the bottom of the people is what stands out the most for me, because it's just understanding those individuals and going, do you know what? Okay, I've got a bit of an idea of how I want to do things over the next few weeks, for example, for training sessions, but I've got a rough idea. But if we just go back through this and go, okay, well, what does the space look like? How might that help or hinder individuals? And I suppose it's trying to get out of their way a little bit and actually give them space to really kind of flourish within the environment. And it may be that somebody at a particular moment may need to be outside of the activity and doing something that's not separate, but kind of a more of a safe environment for them, and then we integrate them. Or it could be that they benefit from being a bit of a leader. So there's so many different things that you can do, but if we use this model, we can start to think about maybe some little tweaks and changes that we can do.
Sorry, Andy, I'll jump just very quick as well around the neurodivergent specific. A lot of neurodivergent children, especially younger ones, don't feel cold, don't feel heat, don't realise that they're getting thirsty because their body mechanisms and the brain doesn't work quite as other people. So you've got to be really careful on a cold day to keep an eye on having equipment, so that you might take extra water bottles, you may have extra tops for people. And think of things like that, because a neurodivergent individual will not feel the cold until it is actually sometimes too late, and they'll never warm up then. So there's little things like that just to consider and think about as well when you've got your equipment in your bag.
That's really useful. Thank you for that, Danny. And Paula, thank you for your kind of additional information in the chat as well. It's really, really useful. So recommend, if you haven't had a read, to have a little look in there as well, everyone. So thank you. Yeah, this time does fly when it comes to this. We won't go into this one, but this is just kind of a final, I suppose, discussion point, which can blend into any kind of point. So if before the end of the session you have any specific things you'd like to ask, either just let us know that you'd like to ask something in the chat, or pop kind of a brief overview in there, and then hopefully we'll pick up a few bits at the end. So I suppose this section here was really just about highlighting the importance of kind of communication, and the fact that we're hopefully all in it, you know, for the same reason. So for you as a coach, sometimes again you can feel quite isolated, but really, really important when we're thinking about the individuals that we're coaching, that we do interact with parents, carers, and other people within your club to get that extra support. Hopefully we'll all know, and I think Lee's on the call, is actually a welfare officer for his club, but you have welfare officers, and it's, again, none of us will necessarily be experts in any of these things, but if there is a concern around the individual, or you'd like some additional guidance, you can go to those people within your club. But I suppose if I think about different groups that I've coached, and think about individual children, worked a lot with kind of foundation phase, sort of 5 to 11-year-olds, that interaction with the parent can be really, really useful, just to kind of go, you know, what sort of day have they had? You know, it may be that, for example, they maybe don't want too much information today, or they want to just be kind of left to their own devices a little bit, but to still be kind of present and kicking a ball around, and sometimes that's just enough for that individual. But one thing that we spoke about last week in the lead up to this call was around kind of clear boundaries, and Danny may want to go into a bit more detail, but I think we need to have clear expectations regardless of kind of whoever you're coaching. I think it's really important for all grassroots coaches to make sure that you kind of set your stall up. This is why I'm doing it, and what kind of environment I want to set, and anybody else that you're working with, you need to kind of liaise with them as well, and also to have those discussions. Sometimes there might be some difficult things with parents and things, but if it's clear that the kind of route that you're going down, I think that can really, really help. And also with the actual individuals, and for many of you it'll be children and young people, is to make sure that they know what the boundaries are. So yes, sometimes we might be really handing over a lot of the activity and responsibility to them, but there's still boundaries in place in terms of safety of them and others. I think that's really important to know.
Yeah, the one that jumps out from a neurodivergent perspective is the relationship with the parents. And Paul and myself have got a brilliant relationship. We do fall out over the charity sometimes, but that's a slightly different thing. But for me, it's setting those boundaries of what's acceptable, what isn't, but also gaining the respect of the parents. My view is, when the child is, and they are children, even my under 17s, I still look at them as young adults, but they are children, they're in your care. So what I do is set boundaries that they're actually my care, and I'd resist parents that want to walk on and look after their child, not from a negative. What I want them to do is that the parent to be able to see their child enjoying themselves in a safe environment, so they become my care while they're in that time with me. And I make it a football issue. So if somebody is not being able to concentrate, or some people might look and go, oh, that's a bad behaviour. It isn't. It may just be how they're reacting. As long as you've built the rapport with the parents and they trust and respect you, I make it a football issue, not a parent issue. So they talk to Danny, the coach, about football and how they're reacting. I see so many parents getting sort of, can you come and get your child, please, because they're not doing as they're told and things like that. You've just got to be mindful of those boundaries, that the parents should have trust and respect in you to deal with it and make it a football thing and build that rapport. And myself and Paula's son did that, and it takes a while. It takes a lot of time and effort, but once you get it, then that's really powerful, really powerful. I've seen some questions coming up as well. I don't know how we're going to cover that. We're running into overtime.
Yeah, I suspected it may happen anyway, to be honest.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything so far. It's been really valuable. So if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask, feel free to just unmute. I wouldn't expect everyone would be doing it at once. So if you'd like to unmute and just ask your question to any of us, and we have got some time. If anyone does need to shoot off now that we're at the hour, please obviously feel free to do so, and we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. But if Danny, Paula and Millie happy, we can perhaps just have another 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Andy, can I kick us off if that's all right?
Go for it.
Something that that I sort of have a conversation with a lot of parents about. I think what really made me passionate about this session was I speak to a lot of different parents that come to me that have had situations or scenarios where their child has maybe felt excluded from their team, and the parent isn't sure whether it's because they have autism, ADHD or something, or if it's just what happens in football. And something we see a lot of is I guess players that maybe kick the football whilst the coach is talking. Maybe you're in an Astro 3G sort of pitch, and you know how that fence rattles when the ball hits it, and a player can be kicking and kicking and kicking the ball out of 3G sort of fence. I guess the question here is, when you have, and I think we spoke about it earlier, potentially disruptive behaviour that may be affecting, could you maybe give anyone in particular, Danny, Paula, etc., a couple of maybe tips that people can do that don't involve potentially adding in an additional support? Because a lot of when I speak to coaches, a lot of the first concern is, well, it's just me taking the session and I don't know how to maybe converse with that player whilst also supporting the rest of the group.
You've got to keep them engaged. If they've got time to kick a ball against a fence, they're not engaged with the activity. Hence why I like the circles, because you get them in the circles, there's all sorts you can do in that circle. And it's having the right level of competition so they feel engaged, that they're not then disengaged by, I prefer kicking a ball against the fence. Again, I know we've got the session where we'll do some practical things, but I do simple things like, and I just shout out number 1 means sit on the ball, and everybody's laughing at me going, why are you shouting number 1, Dan? Well, if they can sit on the ball and you have a competition who sits down first, that means they've got close control. They're not blasting it anywhere. So you're building that little bit of skill development, but fun. Number 2 is, I want a bit of skill and turn. That's all it is. So you shout at number 2. Number 3, you leave your ball, go and touch a cone, get back. So it's transition, in possession, out of possession. Number 4, you do a press up over the ball. It's just like getting tripped up. You've got to jump back up. And it's doing that. And then you can do the intensity to meet your group. So if they are starting to lose it, you do it quicker, because then they get more engaged. You haven't got some of them kicking a ball against the fence because they're not really engaged with it. You set a straight line of cones and ask them to dribble through them and then shoot. Well, the 4 that are stood in the queue, if one of them is neurodivergent, he'll be kicking it against the fence, or sorry, they will be kicking it against the fence, or they'll lose it. They'll be counting the clouds, and they're just not engaging in that activity. So it's making sure the activity is for the right level that they're developing, but you've got to get that fun element in there, especially at the younger age. Now, if I use my 17s as a group, and there's probably of that group of 15, I'd say 6 are on the spectrum, and you probably wouldn't know because we built an environment. They know that that's outside the boundary to be able to kick a fence at that age. So it's different things for different age groups that you can come up with. But for me, it's got to be engaged, and it's got to be in a fun way to engage them while they're learning.
I think just to add to that as well, Danny, I think these things are probably more important to plan for than having all bells and whistles on your kind of session plan and having an activity that does this, and it looks great on paper. And sometimes we can get quite obsessed and bogged down in that. I remember I used to be a kind of a serial collector of different sessions that I used to see, realised that I probably wasn't going to use many of them over a longer period of time, and just had kind of classic templates that we'd use just from experience, I suppose. But planning for different eventualities and the what ifs, I think, are really, really important. So the transition, and not in terms of football sense, but from one activity to another. So when they arrive, we're going to do this, the next activity is this. Can we have those things set up in a kind of clever way so that all we really need to do is just remove things? And that means therefore that it may be that our intervention is literally just grab a drink whilst you're going to get a drink, dribble your ball with you, dribble it back. And then I'm going to give you no more than 20-30 seconds explanation of what the activity is. I might show you it quickly, talk it through, walk it through, and we're off. Now, if you can get to the stage where there's minimal downtime, engagement generally will increase. So it's planning how long your interventions are, but also what it is that you say within them is really, really important. And if you can get it kind of that less is more stage, I think you're onto a bit of a winner.
Another simple one is they all want to pick the teams, but then what you end up is the same kids want to play with the same kids. You end up with a sort of a potential that the stronger kids all want to play together because they know the stronger kids. So even to get over that, I just put bibs down. I ask them to put bibs down one side of the shorts to the side so they can replicate sort of protecting the ball. I've already got them in the circle because they put the cones down, and just give them 4 minutes running round, and whoever ends up with a bib puts it on. Them are the teams. So it's again, instead of getting them to run around and warm up, just add a bit of fun. And the bibs down the side, technically they're still starting to use that body shape automatically to protect the bib. And at the end of it, you put the bib on, there's your 2 teams. So again, if you've got neurodivergent children in that's fun. Whereas if they're the last one to get picked every week, imagine how that feels for their self-esteem, because everybody else has been picked and they know maybe their development's a little bit behind.